I think what I'm gonna do is talk for a little bit about this question of searching for democracy, and then really I would most like to have a dialogue. And even though this room isn't set up perfectly for dialogue, I will somehow make it happen. I was interested that in that generous introduction, you said perhaps I'm best known for the underground. I never think of myself that way, but it's, you know, and I think if you ask my granddaughters, they would say, I don't even know what you're talking about. You know, like, it was very funny, the night that ABC debate, the night of the ABC debate, remember Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama were debating? I had my graduate students over for, my doctoral students over for dinner, and somebody turned on the TV at the end of dinner, and there was the end of the debate, and Stephanopoulos asked Obama about his relationship with me, and I had 15 students in the room, and 5 of them fell on the floor. They had never heard of this relationship that I'm best known for. Just, you know, it just depends on where you look, I suppose. Anyway, I'm almost 65 years old, so in a long life, I resist being labeled as any one thing. I'm still a work in progress, as you know, and maybe that's something to talk about. Well, let me begin, though. I don't know where you were on November 4th, 2008, but I'll bet you were paying attention. Is that correct? You were paying attention? Yes, I was in Grant Park in Chicago. Were any of you in Grant Park in Chicago? You're from Chicago. Max, were you? No. Well, don't worry about it. You can lie and say you were because there were millions of people there and nobody will know the difference. But I was in Grant Park, and I couldn't pry myself away. I spent most of the night there. It was an ecstatic experience. I went with a young man who was living with us at the time, with whom I'm writing a graphic novel, a professor a law professor from Amsterdam, a professor from Zimbabwe, and we were all in the park together, just couldn't get enough of it, drinking it in. The sense of relief in that park that night was palpable. Didn't you feel a sense of relief, some of you? I mean, my God. We didn't have to put up with more years beyond the 8 years that we'd already endured. That was palpable, but there was also a real sense of possibility. And for me, I mean, there were 3 things that stood out for me, and I actually sobbed openly 3 or 4 times that night. But one was that here was the election of the first African-American president, and something that was unthinkable 2 years ago was suddenly a done deal. And the sense that this was a really significant blow against the legacy of white supremacy still hasn't left me. I'm still kind of tingling about that. It's not a fatal blow. It's not the final blow. And that would be a mistake, but it is a blow, and it's worth noting that something in the long, long, sad, tragic legacy of this country, something was breached in that moment, and that was significant. I also think it was hugely significant that there was a generational shift. That is, that we turned the page on all those old 60-year-olds, get them off the stage. That's how I feel. Well, I am one, but, you know, I'll stay for a minute. But the idea that it's time for a new kind of vision, a new way of looking at things. And it was interesting that McCain, of all the kind of miscalculations in his campaign, the idea that he was going to run on the 60s and wave the bloody shirt, rethink the Vietnam War. He was somehow a hero. And then there were these traitors, you know. And I mean, what an odd, you know, narrative that was. And for people your age, who wanted to get into that? And for people my age, you really wanted to refight the Vietnam War because we could, and we probably should. In a sense, that generational turning of the page is a problem because we've never adequately had a truth and reconciliation process in this country about what could be learned from Vietnam. And because we haven't learned the lessons of Vietnam, we find ourselves trudging right into the same pits and swamps and holes and caves, you know, and that's a problem. But all in all, let's shift, let's turn the generational page, yes. But more significant than that, for me, was the fact that we did elect a community organizer to the presidency. And I think that that's something we should take a moment to really understand and really embrace. Here's a man, you can't think of another president in history, because there isn't one, who would be comfortable knocking on the door of a public housing project aspect of democracy. The idea that you only speak to people who agree with you, that you have to do a political litmus test before you'll talk, that somebody isn't a citizen or part of the real America unless they agree with you, that's nuts. And that's an absolute recipe for catastrophe in a democracy. So the idea that Obama, whatever else he knows, somewhere in his makeup is this idea that there's a value in talking to strangers, there's a value in listening to people and getting their read on things, and then understanding their particular hurt and hope. And from that sense of their own hurt and hope to be able to do something. That's huge. And one real indication that he does understand this, I don't know if you remember my favorite moment in the campaign, was the moment when Obama was asked by a reporter in one of the primary debates, who would Martin Luther King support? Do you remember him being asked that? And Obama, without missing a beat, responded, King wouldn't support any of us. King would be in the streets building a movement for justice. That's a community organizer's answer. That's the answer of somebody who understands that while there is no doubt that power exists at the top, there's also no doubt that power comes from below and exists below. And that's where we live. And that's what we have to grasp, I think, fundamentally, if we're going to understand our responsibility as citizens. Now, some of you are probably political junkies. True? Are any of you political junkies? Yeah? Some of you, my sympathies. Okay. Come on, admit it. During the election, weren't you watching the polls like a neurotic? I mean, weren't you like completely crazy? Yes, of course you were. And I wasn't. I actually ignored the whole thing because I couldn't, if I'd gotten sucked into it, I would have spent a lot of time being defensive and worried. And so I didn't, it went by. I have 3 grown sons. They're all political junkies. So they would feed me the latest. Sometimes they would text me and say, you know, a couple weeks before the election, there's a 98% chance that Obama's going to win. There were these websites that said shit like that. Kind of bizarre. Anyway, so you were political junkies. And then after the election, didn't you suffer a kind of a postpartum depression? Like, oh God, now we have the baby. What the hell are we going to do? I know a lot of people who did. And that's why I feel even to this day, thank God for Minnesota. It's still in play. So you still have polls you can read every morning if you're really crazy. And I know some of you aren't. So and of course there's Illinois. There's a lot to think about and look at. But really this sense of postpartum depression, and then all during the transition when Obama was just made a mess out of our neighborhood, Max. I have some friends here from the neighborhood, and so we live 2 doors from each other, and Obama lives 2 blocks away. And God, they created a green zone there. I had to get my ID had to be checked to go home. It's completely crazy, but it was a small sacrifice. But so everybody's watching the transition, and they're talking like this. They're saying, "What does it mean, Rahm Emanuel? What's that going to mean for my future? And do you think Obama's going to help us? What does this mean, Summers in Treasury, or Summers as the economic advisor? What does that mean?" And again, I think that's a bad case of kind of postpartum depression because you're looking, with all due respect, in the wrong direction. You're looking at the palace. It's like sifting the garbage outside the king's mansion, instead of asking yourself, what the hell am I doing? What am I doing? So it's one thing to say, what's Obama going to do for me? It's quite another thing to say, what am I doing? And I've urged young people for months now that anytime you have the impulse to put a press on the Obama administration, which I'm not against, but when you have that impulse, you have to start by asking yourself, what press have I put on myself? What have I demanded of myself? I'm demanding something of Obama, but what am I demanding of myself? And why do I say that? I say that because all history will tell you that as smart as Obama is, and he is the smartest guy